thing they haven't done is gotten off to a great start.
Now he'll rise and fire and knock it down. The best kind of answer for Kevin Durant.
So good. He is so good at reading screens, coming off, and getting his feet set quickly.
Our test. Durant all the way. So athletic, second year out of UCLA. Such an improvement from last year to this year. Not a great outside shooter, but he knocks it down.
Continues to struggle, Lamar Odom. He's now 0 for 3 in this one and a non-factor in the first three.
James Harden and one. Comes Green. Kobe loses it. Westbrook back to Durant.
Man, this OKC trio was just something special. If only they stayed together. Over the course of NBA history, there have been many deals that have resurfaced the league for years to come. Sometimes trades end up benefiting both teams, hurting all teams in the trade, but generally, a winner and a loser arises from the trade down the line, and today I'll be beginning a series of looking back at blockbuster trades, assessing the specifics of the trade, and giving my thoughts on a winner of the trade. The trade of today's video is between the Thunder and the Rockets, including 8-time All-Star, 6-time All-NBA shooting guard James Harden. Hey everyone, TCNBA Junkie here, and without further ado, let's take a look into possibly one of the biggest what if it never happened trades of all time. So on the day of October 27, 2012, which may have been a couple days before the 2012 season began or a little bit into it, the Rockets would decide to throw a trade at the Thunder, and they would agree on a trade, and the Rockets in this trade would receive James Harden, Cole Aldridge, Daquan Cook, and Laser Hayward from the Oklahoma City Thunder, while OKC would receive from the Rockets Kevin Martin, Jeremy Lamb, 2 first-round picks, which one of the first-round picks would become Steven Adams in the 2014 NBA draft, I believe, and a second-round pick, which would become Alex Abrinas in 2013. That makes sense? And this trade, basically, at the time, the Rockets were definitely a struggling team with a 34-32 record in the 2011-2012 season, which was the lockout year, with players such as Kyle Lowry, Louis Scola, and Kevin Martin, who was included into the Thunder trade, who averaged 17 points per game that season. The team was definitely in need of a player to move the franchise forward. I think it kind of falls similar to teams such as the Orlando Magic, the Washington Wizards, those kind of teams where you really don't know where you're going moving forward, but you want to kind of have like an identity moving forward. This is what the Rockets were kind of looking for. And the team was just in need of a player who had star potential, and they know that Harden had that. And thus, after only playing 3 years in the league, and Harden was just 22 years old or 21, this was the reason that they decided to agree to a trade. Harden would average in that 2011-2012 season. There was a really impressive year for the Thunder. He averaged 16.8 points per game, 39% from the three-point line, which is his best in his career, and 125 offensive rating, which is the best of his career, 49.1 field goal percentage, and with the Rockets, he would win that year the Sixth Man of the Year, and they would make a finals appearance against the Miami Heat, which they would unfortunately lose, as the Miami Heat would win that game. But regardless of that, Harden was seen by the Rockets and whoever was there before, maybe Daryl Morey, as he had a great court vision. Not only that, but scoring ability at 22 years old. Like, the fact that OKC trio was so successful and was really scary. I mean, they went to the finals with Kevin Durant, I think, is a 5th year. Yeah, 5 years in the league or 4 years. Westbrook one year younger than him, and then Harden 1 year younger. They drafted 3 years in a row, 3 players who would go on to become MVPs, which is insane. But like I said, Harden had great court vision and scoring ability, and this deal was just simple for the Rockets they gave up a lot, like a lot of assets, but in turn they brought in a player, which I'll get into. We all know what James Harden is, so I'm not going to really go into that as insanely as it should. But just kind of a move to get him into a different environment and let him flourish and become the MVP that he is today. players that I think kind of fall into who could use a new environment would be like Aaron Gordon, a player who, was really good on the Magic, and he's a solid player, but ultimately I think he could thrive if he wasn't in Orlando anymore, especially since there's been question, he doesn't really seem like the number one option, and I feel like he needs to be in a system where he's more utilized and they have a bit of a direction. As well as Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons. I know this is a bit hypocritical if you've seen my 76ers future video, which, by the way, if you haven't seen that, there's a card above. You can watch that video. I talked about how they should stay together, but at the same time, this season could really determine, this NBA resumption could really determine if they're going to be able to stay together. And they might, either of them could probably use a new environment, especially since it hasn't been working out in Philly. And Karl Anthony Towns, a guy who's been struggling to find any success in Minnesota, and that's, part of that is attributed to his lackadaisical effort on the defensive end. But regardless, he still could use a new environment, maybe with another co-star or a different team that could definitely utilize him better. As for OKC, this was the biggest questioning thing was they were signing Harden would have put them into the luxury tax, and with Westbrook, Durant, and Serge Ibaka all on long-term contracts, they could only afford to offer him, which they did. So basically, the story was that the deadline was coming up on a Wednesday. That was coming up, and whether or not they were going to extend Harden or they were going to make him a restricted free agent, and they were trying to extend him, and they offered him a 4-year, $54 million contract. But Harden felt insulted by that offer, and he said no. But unfortunately, they didn't really have much more to offer, and the Rockets were a team that realized we could offer him this, but we have to make a couple moves. So they decided that they were going to try to trade with the Thunder, and which they did, because the Thunder couldn't extend Harden for what he wanted, so they tried to send him away to at least get something for him. But at the same time, I feel like that was a really, interesting move they made on their end. And they ended up with solid scorers in Jeremy Lamb and Kevin Martin, two guys, who we'll get back and get into what happened in long term. But they're two efficient scorers and future picks to add to the team But another thing I thought that was really interesting from this Thunder Rockets trade is that it was really just $5 million, because that's literally the extra money that the Rockets were able to throw at him. The $15 million for 4 years, basically, and Harden accepted that from the Rockets. He was okay with that when the Thunder couldn't throw it at him, and they decided they had no choice but to trade him, because them and Harden weren't really going to be able to agree on a contract extension, which would have been an issue down the line. And interesting enough, too, Kyle Lowry was on the Rockets at the time, but he was traded to the Raptors in order to provide one of the first-round picks, so that that would go into this trade. Now, as for a winner of this trade, come on, do I really need to explain this? This is probably the biggest. This was ranked probably the biggest trade. It was ranked the biggest trade by a lot of people of the 2010s, and I firmly believe that, because the guy that the Rockets took a chance on was James Harden, who has been ever since that, ever from the 2012-2013 season, he's been an all-star every year since that season. He's gotten the Rockets to the playoffs every year since. He's averaged 29.6 points per game, 7.7 assists, 6 rebounds with the Rockets his entire time with them. He was the 2017-18 season MVP, a 3-time scoring champ, which including this 2020 season, which he'll probably earn, so a 3-time scoring champ, the assist leader of 2017 with 11.2 assists. He's led the league in and this is interesting. He's led the league in free throw makes and attempts for the past 6 years. For 6 years in a row, he's led the league in free throws made and attempted, which is not surprising given that James Harden's points production comes a lot from the free throw line, but still insane to think about. And he's easily top 5. He's probably the best producer in the 2010s just statistically. I mean, alongside Westbrook, there's an argument there, and easily a top 10 player of the 2010s. Now for the Thunder, I'm not going to say they completely lost this trade, but they did lose significantly. That's why it's one of the top trades of the 2010s for the Rockets and not for the Thunder. The Thunder significantly lost this trade. They would find themselves, the players that they got would easily find themselves out of the league, except for Lamb, who's now on the Indiana Pacers, so you saw how that worked out for them. But the only thing that really came out of this trade was Alex Abrines, who served as a quality rotational player, and Steven Adams, who would become he's the starting center of the team. And I'm right now is probably being overpaid with like $24 million a year. But looking to now, just thinking about the team, the players and the teams involved. So for the Thunder, what's happened ever since that trade? The Thunder would trade for Paul George. These are the most significant things that have happened in recent memory. The Thunder would trade for Paul George in July of 2017 and sending Oladipo and Sabonis to the Pacers. And what was interesting with this trade at the time was it was one of the first ever deals that was done where a team would trade for a player who was on the last year of his contract. That's never really happened yet, and now we see it pretty often, like the Lakers are doing it with Anthony Davis, and I don't know any others off the top of my head, but this was the first time they ever tried to take the season to convince a player to re-sign. I guess the Jimmy Butler and the Philadelphia 76ers was a good example of that as well. And yeah, so it was the first time that's ever really happened. And throughout in the 2018-19 season, Paul George was averaged 28 points per game, 8 rebounds. He'd be third in MVP voting in 2019, and then he would be flipped to the Clippers for Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Gallinari, 5 first-round picks, and 2 first-round pick swaps for Paul George, and then also so Kawhi would sign with the Los Angeles Clippers. And what was interesting is that they actually completed their convincing Paul George to sign in OKC, and he did re-sign, but 1 year later they were forced to trade him because he demanded it to be want out, if you see the tweets on the screen. As for Russell Westbrook, he would remain in OKC for a lot, every year until this 2019-2020 season. He would average triple-double from 2016 to 2019, which is, record-breaking. We've never seen that happen before. He did it one season, and that was monumental, but he goes and does it 2 more years, and now everybody's so used to it, which is crazy to me. But he's then traded to the Rockets as the Thunder are basically just going into a full rebuild mode for Chris Paul, and I think a first-round pick was sent to the Thunder. And then as for Kevin Durant, because he was also part of the trade too, part of the OKC trio, he would leave for the Warriors in July of 2016, which, pretty much surprised every fan in the nation because he went and did one of the softest moves of all time. I don't care what people say. Kevin Durant did leave the team, and I don't agree with what he did. He went on to go win 2 titles and two Finals MVPs, but at the end of the day, this team was already it was 73-9 team, and then they lose in 7 to the Cavaliers, and then they go on and sign Kevin Durant to a max for 3 years, which is still insane to me. Or I think it was a 2-year deal because he didn't want to sign long term. But then he would go sign with the Nets after they lost to Kawhi and the Raptors in the finals, and he got injured, and he hasn't played any of the 2019-2020 NBA season. But as for the Rockets, what would happen in this was they wouldn't win anything. They would get to the Western Conference. The best they ever got to was the Western Conference Finals in 2018 with Chris Paul, James Harden in Game 7. But they went on in that game to miss 14 threes in a row. 14 threes. And then eventually they would also go trade for, like I said, Westbrook and Harden would reunite. So that was really cool. They were considering they were all a trio, and now Harden and Westbrook got to reunite at one point again. So looking at this trade overall, it's really interesting because it's technically it's probably the biggest trade of the 2010s, but at the same time, really long term, nobody won from the trade. The Rockets were the clear winners, but they never won. They haven't in terms of a title, they've never gotten one. To OKC, they never got one in the 2010s. So really from that perspective, nobody really succeeded. Like I said, the Rockets won this trade, but in terms of titles, nobody benefited in that manner. But despite that, the Rockets clearly won the trade. They brought in a superstar in the making, and he became a superstar, reached the potential. It was a very bold move at the first, giving up a lot for a guy, but they did the right thing. And I think a lot of teams could look into this nowadays where they've been really content. They really haven't made a move. Just kind of make a move. I think that's the thing I would say to a lot of teams. Just try to figure out what you're going to do moving forward and just stick to it. If you want to just go full steam ahead with a young guy and just let him have the keys to the team, do it. If you want to contend and bring some veteran pieces to add to your team, do it. Just you're only it's only gonna help you or hurt you, but you can get picks, and that can help you for a rebuild. So really, there's nothing I think that could go wrong for a team who needs to figure out their identity. But this was definitely a big what-if trade, and I just can't believe that really it was $5 million that really prevented this trade prevented the trio from staying together. And there's the biggest, it's the what-if of how many titles these guys could have won, or if they could have won a title if they all stayed together. I think they easily could have, considering they just didn't give each other long enough. They went to a finals and then they lost, and then they trade James Harden, and the Thunder would never go to another finals with Westbrook and with Westbrook and Durant. And then I think it is cool, though, however, first to see Kevin Durant thrive and win his titles, but I disagree with who we want him with, and Harden and Westbrook reuniting in H-Town and Houston. But ultimately, I just can't believe how much this trade impacted the 2010s altogether. If they all stayed together, Kevin Durant maybe never goes to OKC. Harden would have obviously never been in Houston, and Houston would have never made that trade. So, Kyle Lowry may have never went to the Toronto Raptors. And, this trio might have won some titles, and maybe some other drama would have arisen later in their careers. Just a lot of hypothetical situations that could have came out of this trade if they had stayed together, obviously. And I really wish we got to see that, but we never did. And a lot of the younger generation never really got to see them. And as for me as well, but I got to see them a little bit, but that trio never really got to see the light of day after just 3 years ultimately of all three of them. So it was a little unfortunate, but ultimately that's why we look back at these trades to see what the biggest impacts of them are. So I think the OKC Houston trade was definitely one of the biggest impacting trades of the 2010s. And yeah, that will be the end of today's video. Comment down below if you guys would like to talk about a trade you want me to talk about in a video, looking back on it. Make sure to subscribe and like the video as well, and I'm out.